Did you hear me?
Have you ever asked your mums and dads for anything and really wanted something and they just wouldn't give it to you? Yeah, what was that then? Xbox One. Sometimes it's like that, isn't it? You can ask and ask and not get it. Why don't you imagine, right, okay, that you have got 2 small children and they're watching the television and on comes an advert for Disney World, Florida. Oh, can I go that? Can I go, Mum, Dad? And you say no. And they keep on asking. You take them somewhere else, the following year, up come the adverts again, and they want it you again. And again you say, no, not this year. This goes on for 4 years. And every time that the adverts come up, they keep on at you, please take us to Disneyland, Florida. 5th year, one of them's nearly old enough to have a paper round by now. When the adverts come up, instead of just pleading with you, they look at you with that face, point at the advert. And then you say, come on into town with me. You take them into town, walk them straight into a travel agent's and say, I want to book a holiday to Disneyland, Florida for the family. Kids ecstatic. Yeah? Now what's going through the minds of the children when you say that in a travel agent's? They're thinking, I finally worn them out. You know, they never wanted to go. We finally got our own way by keeping on at them. Yeah? Actually, it's different to that. Because when they first mentioned it to you, you thought, oh, wouldn't mind going there. I just can't afford it. And what you did, you found out the price, thought, oh, I definitely can't afford it. But you decided you'd put £20 away a week until you could afford it. And every year, you still can't afford it. So after 5 years, 250 weeks, £5,000, you can afford it. And you take them down there and you have a brilliant holiday. Now the children are in a position of weakness, aren't you? Because no matter how much you save up, you can't take your family to Florida, can you? You're in a complete position of weakness. Now the story I'm looking at today about the widow and the judge, the widow is in a position of weakness, complete weakness in this situation. In verse 1, Luke introduces this by saying Jesus wants the disciples to always pray and not get discouraged. And you think, well, that's a bit strange. Why would the disciples get discouraged? Because they're with Jesus, aren't they? You're not discouraged in the presence of Jesus, are you? But we've got to put the passage into context because you were under Roman rule at the time, and Pontius Pilate, who's in charge, any rebellious behaviour, and he's likely to crucify 200 at a time. It doesn't faze him. You've got Herod, who's in charge of Galilee. He's already killed John the Baptist, and he's looking out for followers of Jesus and John the Baptist that might be causing any trouble. And then you've got the religious rulers who have decided that they don't like Jesus and they're plotting to kill him. In his last week, they said that that's what they're going to do. And he is heading straight into the lion's den, into Jerusalem. So even though they've got Jesus with them now, Jesus knows the time is coming soon when they won't have him, when they're going to be without him, when it's going to be fearful. And in those times, when the odds seem stacked against them, they're going to need to know that prayer is important on a daily basis and that he will hear them, and they're not to be fearful and get discouraged. So that's why he's coming in at this point. When he says pray always, though, it doesn't mean in a continual timeline so you can't stop to eat or go to the toilet. It means bringing it as part of your daily life. Okay? So let's look at the parable and see what it says to us. 2 characters, the judge and the widow. Now, judges were always important to the Jewish nation. Before they had kings, the judges ruled. But even when they had kings, judges were still important. So in 2 Chronicles, got King Jehoshaphat, and he laid down some quite good rules for judges. And that was, be like God. You know, the words you say must be the words that God will say. So be God-fearing. Don't take any bribes, and don't be corrupt in any way. And there was clear rules for the judges. But by Jesus' time, it was a long, long way from that. They reckon that a village judge could be bought for as small as 1 bowl of meat. And they had a word for the prohibition judges. If you just changed 1 letter, it sounded like robber judges. And that's the sort of nickname they gave to them. But it tells us that this judge had absolutely no respect for God and no respect for people. All right, so he's not God-fearing at all. But actually, a better translation is, he had no shame in front of people. Which meant that he didn't care if you're a widow or if you're an orphan. It doesn't shame him because he's got no shame. There's not an inkling of honour in him. And that's quite significant in a culture which was big on shame and honour. So that was the judge. Now the widow in the story is a symbol of vulnerability. And in Jewish society, the widows and the orphans, they had a special place. If there was a court case coming up, they should be heard first because of how vulnerable they were. Especially if you had nobody. And this lady, we know she not only was a widow, but she had no sons and she had no men that could stand up for her. And we know that because she was in court and only men went to court. If women's cases came up, you'd get a man to represent you. So she had nobody. So the widow was weak. And yet she knew that if she kept coming to that judge, she could wear him down. So every day she would come and she would shout out, "Oh, it's my turn to be heard." And the judge would ignore her. And the next day she'd turn up again, she'd be shouting out. To fill in the gap a little bit here of that picture, there's a really interesting account from a traveller in the 1800s, where he'd gone to the ancient city of Nisbis, which is in Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq. As he went through the walled gates, there was a prison on the left and there was a courtroom on the right. So he walks into the courtroom and it's full of people, mainly men, and the judge was on a little raised platform, half covered in cushions, and there were some male secretaries around him. Now a lot of people shouting out, "Hear me next, hear me next." But the wise people were at the front talking to his secretaries, whispering in their ears, and then when their agreed fee was high enough, i.e. the bribe, the guy would then talk to the judge, and the judge would say, "All right, we'll hear him next." And that was how it was working. But he noticed there was one woman, and every time a case started, she would shout out, "Time to hear me, it's my turn." And they kept telling her, "Shut up, you keep coming back every day, stop coming back every day." The woman took no notice. She said, "I will come every day until the judge hears me." And in the end, by the end of the day, the travellers said, the judge was so frustrated, he said, "What does that woman want?" And he heard her, and she explained that she had a field, her son ploughed, but her son had been taken to be a soldier for the country. She had no one to plough the field, and yet she was still being charged taxes. So he said, exempt her from the tax. And that was fine, she got what she wanted. And I guess the story of the widow here is very similar. It's a very similar situation. And the judge says, in Jesus' story, she keeps coming. And there's this eternity about it. It's like the tide. She will keep on coming until I do something. And she's wearing me out. Another translation is, she's like a bullet to my head, or blow to my head. Now, she wouldn't actually hit him, because she would have been removed from court. But it's like, she is doing my head in. And if I let her go on, she will drive me insane. So for that purpose and that purpose only, I will give her what she wants and get rid of her. So that's the story. But what does that tell us about prayer? The danger here is that if we look at it from the judge's perspective, it's saying, I'm not interested in the prayers, I'm not interested in the requests, but because you keep on and on, I'll give you what you want. Now, that doesn't sound right, does it? So we'll go back to the other parable, which was the friend at midnight Jesus told. In that parable, the homeowner had a friend come to visit him quite late at night, which was rare. So he had to go out and get the food to give him a meal, because that was the custom, otherwise he'd be shamed. The first person he called on, he knew had bread for the meal. So he knocks him up, and he doesn't want to get out because his kids are in bed and he's in bed with them, and it's late at night. He doesn't want to get up. But because he doesn't want to bring shame on himself, next morning all the villagers think he was the one that let us down. He gets up. He not only gives him the bread he needs, but he gives him the rest of the stuff he needs for the meal to stop him going around and knocking at other houses. So he gets everything he needs at the first house. And Jesus said, in this star he used, which was the rabbinical star called light and heavy, if this man, because of his sense of shame and respect, will get up and give you what you need for your visitor, and like even when he doesn't really want to do it, how much more, the heavy, will God give you when you ask him, when you come to him with your prayers? Because God can be trusted, can't he? Now, we can trust God with our prayers. That's what Jesus said with the parable of the friend at midnight. But that parable was told right off the back of the Lord's Prayer. So if we were to take this view that it's persisting in prayer that gets us results, then it would have to be when we go to Jesus and say, can we have our daily bread? He'd say, no. But you keep asking every day, next Thursday, I might give you what you need. Yeah? Or, if you ask God, forgive me for my trespasses, forgive me for what I've done wrong, he'll say, no. But if you ask and ask and ask and ask until I'm sick of your voice, then I'll forgive you. So we can't understand it from that perspective, can we? It must be another point that Jesus is trying to make. If we see it from what the widow's doing, then we can understand more what this type of prayer is like. Because I don't think it's the same prayers that Jesus is referring to in his first parable, which is where we've got, give me today our daily bread, forgive me. You know, these are like almost like instant prayers, aren't they? These are prayers that are coming out of tough times, prayers that are going to take a while to answer. And the widow, she knows that if she keeps on at the judge, he will eventually break and give her what she wants. So she knows that this isn't going to be an instant prayer. This is going to be something that takes her time. She's not going to get into the first time and say, oh, can you hear me now? Oh, yes, madam, what do you want? Because she knows what the judge is like. But she's prepared to do what it takes to get the result. And that's the type of prayer that Jesus is talking about here. You know, I'm an engineer, and I spent quite a bit of time doing structural engineering, so I know how things crack. All right, I know how things break. Imagine that you've bought a garden chair, one of the ones with metal struts across it, right? Nice big chair, and Big Aunt Edna comes to visit you. She sits in the chair and likes it, right? But it's commonly used, this chair, so you get it out every day in the summer, people up and down on it. Every year she comes to visit, sits on the chair, and she's comfortable. 10 years later, this chair looks exactly the same. There's no corrosion on it. You've looked after it. Aunt Edna comes. She sits down on the chair. You hear her scream. She disappears into the fish pond with her stocking feet up in the air. And you see, oh, the chair's given way. What's happened? Well, every time you sit on that chair, you're putting it through a pressure cycle, on, off. And you get a tiny flaw, because all metal's got flaws in it, which just grows a little bit every time you sit on it. And over the years, it's grown enough, the crack to be halfway through the tube. Which is okay when you sat on it, but then when Aunt Edna comes along, the metal that's left is not enough to withstand her weight. So that the intensity builds up in the crack inside, and as she sits on it, the chair collapses. And if you look at the metal, you can see half of it's shiny. That's the fatigue crack, which you've grown over the period of 10 years. And the other half is rough, where it suddenly cracked through. And that's like our prayers, isn't it? We can't see the fatigue crack. You know, you don't know it's cracked, do you? You don't know how Edna was going to end up in the fish pond. But with our long prayers, it takes time, and we add prayer to prayer to prayer. And some of these big prayers, where people we love have turned away from Christ, we want to get them back. Where our friends have got brain tumours and cancers. Where we've got Christians being persecuted in Arabic countries. Where we've got countries fearing because of life-threatening epidemics. These are big prayers, aren't they? They're not going to be solved by one person praying. And as we push our prayers into that situation and join with saints around the world praying for it, that fatigue crack is going to grow. Until at one point, suddenly, things give way, and we see the results of our prayers. 1989, in East Germany, things were pretty bad. And those that wanted to escape East Germany, get across the Berlin Wall, a lot of them got shot, didn't they? There was a guy called Pastor Christian Führer, who was in a church in Leipzig, in East Germany. And he had started prayer meetings for peace. And he'd been going for 7 years, and they'd been getting bigger and bigger. And peace activists had learned of this, and they'd been joining him. And they decided they were going to put on a rally, a peace rally. People that had tried things before like that had been shot, and the authorities said that if you do this rally, we will use every means to quash you. And they told the pastor they had hospital beds ready for the people that were going to get shot. And when the day came, thousands from across East Germany joined at the church, and they set off on the rally from the church, and they all carried candles and said prayers. And thousands of them went off carrying candles and saying prayers in the direction of the wall. The tanks were ready, the guards were ready, and no one fired a shot. And they look back on that rally, they say that was probably the single point that started the downfall, because 2 weeks later these German government fell. The war came down shortly after, and Germany got reunified. And they said to the soldiers, why didn't you shoot? And they said, well, we were prepared for everything, but we weren't prepared to fight candles and prayers. You can't fight against candles and prayers. And we've got situations which look dark and look big. And we come with our small light, with our prayers, and we join with others with our small lights and our prayers, and we walk into those situations. And in that situations, as we join in prayers, then the fear that we've got dissipates, doesn't it? Because we're praying together and we're praying into it. And that's what Jesus said. Pray at all times and don't be discouraged. Because as you pray, you will be less discouraged, because he's there in the fear. And whatever big prayers you've got on, then take encouragement from these words. Pray always and don't be discouraged. Take your light into that situation and your prayers, because the enemy finds it difficult to fight against candles and prayers, your light and your prayers. And some of you may have put down big prayers. You may have had big prayers that you were praying into and you lost heart and put them down. Some of you may have been flexing your prayer muscles and think, actually, there's some big prayers I could take on now. I feel strong enough to take on those prayers. So I would encourage you to pick up those prayers and start running with them again. Those illnesses, the things around the world that really upset you, every day pray for it and be encouraged, yeah? Because we're on the winning side, aren't we? Sure. Yeah? We've got Jesus, the cross is above it all, and we're on the winning side. And Jesus says to us, pray always and don't be discouraged. Amen? Amen. Holy Jesus, thank you that we can join with you in the big prayers. Not everything is instant. Not everything is off the shelf. Sometimes it's like siege warfare, Holy Jesus, and we need to be in there with you, tackling the big prayers and seeing your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven, things put the way you would have it, as we join with you in those prayers. Holy Jesus, give us the courage, help us to pray always, help us not to fear, because we know you're with us day by day. Amen.